Course in Miracles Q&As. Who is the ego at war with? Based on A Course in Miracles teachings. Meditation context. Keeping your attention on or in your body will keep you in the present moment. All guilt, regret, resentment, and anger is based on the past. All worry, anxiety, and fear is centered on some point in the future. In the present moment, none of that fear-based negativity exists. The Course in Miracles text is 1,754 pages long, and the main premise is nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Each of my meditation videos will all have from 7 to 10 A Course in Miracles quotations, and after each quotation I will have a short meditation. Here is the first Course in Miracles quotation. Quotation. Ours is simply the journey back to God, who is our home. Whenever fear intrudes anywhere along the road to peace, it is because the ego has attempted to join the journey with us and cannot do so. Sensing defeat and angered by it, the ego regards itself as rejected and becomes retaliative. A Course in Miracles. We're going to use the 4-7-8 method. The 4-7-8 breathing technique involves breathing in for 4 seconds, holding the breath for 7 seconds, and then exhaling for 8 seconds. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. The ego, which always wants to weaken the mind, tries to separate it from the body in an attempt to destroy it. Yet the ego actually believes that it is protecting it. The ego despises weakness, even though it makes every effort to induce it. The ego wants only what it hates. To the ego, this is perfectly sensible. Believing in the power of attack, the ego wants attack. A Course in Miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. Whenever you respond to your ego, you will experience guilt, and you will fear punishment. The ego is quite literally a fearful thought. However ridiculous the idea of attacking God may be to the sane mind, never forget that the ego is not sane. It represents a delusional system. A Course in Miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. Thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. The ego therefore either distorts them or refuses to accept them. It cannot, however, make them cease to be. A Course in Miracles. In-breath. Hold. Out-breath. Quotation. The ego attacks what is preserving it, which must result in extreme anxiety. That is why the ego never recognizing what it is doing. It is perfectly logical, but clearly insane. A Course in Miracles. In-breath. Hold. Out-breath. Quotation. In one way or another, every relationship the ego makes is based on the idea that by sacrificing itself, it becomes bigger. In such insane relationships, the attraction of what you do not want seems to be much stronger than the attraction of what you do want. For each one thinks that he has sacrificed something to the other and hates him for it. Yet this is what he thinks he wants. A Course in Miracles. In-breath. Hold. Out-breath. Quotation. To identify with the ego is to attack yourself and make yourself poor. That is why everyone who identifies with the ego feels deprived. What he experiences then is depression or anger, because what he did was to exchange self-love for self-hate, making him afraid of himself. A Course in Miracles. In-breath. Hold. Out-breath. Quotation. Do you not realize a war against yourself would be a war on God? Is victory conceivable? And if it were, is this a victory that you would want? A Course in Miracles. In-breath. Hold. Out-breath. Quotation. Conflict within you must imply that you believe the ego has the power to be victorious. Why else would you identify with it? Surely you realize the ego is at war with God. A Course in Miracles. In-breath. Hold. Out-breath. The question posed at the beginning of this meditation was, who is the ego at war with? The quotations that best elaborate on this will be shown here now. The text that I highlighted in green says, thoughts of God are unacceptable to the ego because they clearly point to the non-existence of the ego itself. This quotation appears to imply that the ego is not fond of God. It says that the mere act of thinking about God is unacceptable to the ego. Again, the question posed at the beginning of this meditation was, who is the ego at war with? And the quotations that best elaborate on this will be shown here now. The text that I highlighted in green says, "Do you not realize a war against yourself would be a war on God?" This second quotation that I selected hints that a part of you might be engaged in some type of a war on God. Again, the question posed at the beginning of this meditation was, who is the ego at war with? And the final text that I highlighted in green says, "Surely you realize the ego is at war with God." This final quotation that I selected does in fact state that the ego is at war with God. And how do you know when you're interacting with someone who is coming from their ego? If they have narcissist behavior, too much pride, if they are self-absorbed, selfish, deceptive, etc. Space Eternity Meditation. We're going to take an imaginary trip with your consciousness, and during this imaginary trip, we'll leave your body behind. To begin, see yourself standing in a large grass field. You've been given the ability to travel into space and to go anywhere you like. You don't have to worry about oxygen, collisions, or anything else, because only your consciousness will be traveling into space. You now have the intention and decide to go straight up into the sky. You are now flying up into the clouds. You then decide to pause and take a look around. You look down and see cities, streets, towns, and hills. Now you have the intention and decide to continue flying straight up. You are now in outer space, and it's mostly darkness with lights from stars and distant planets. You then slow down, pause to a standstill, and take a look around. At this point, you decide to go straight ahead in a horizontal direction. Meteors, planets, and other phenomena are racing by you. You then slow down, pause to a standstill, and take a look around. You again decide to continue in the same direction. You continue, and you have now traveled a significant distance while moving extremely fast. You then think to yourself, when will I reach the end of this universe or of this solar system? How will I know when I've gone as far as I can possibly go? You then realize that either there is an upcoming wall of some sort, or space just continues on. And you think to yourself, if there is some sort of a wall ahead of me, what about straight above me? Is there some sort of a wall there too? And what about straight below me and behind me? Is this universe or solar system contained in some sort of a box? Is outer space confined by a box with walls? And if so, what is behind the walls of this box? You think to yourself, if outer space is confined by a box and I go through one of the walls of the box into outer space again, then when does that space end? Is there another box enclosing the box that I just exited from? You then realize that the only thing that makes sense is that there are no walls or boxes in outer space, that space just keeps on going endlessly for an infinite distance. You realize that infinity is the only thing that makes sense when it comes to outer space.